My name is Anna Coleman. I'm 36, and for the past 5 years, I believed I understood love. I loved William with a devotion that sometimes scared even me. We'd built a life together, a quiet, predictable orbit where his routines and my careful planning intertwined seamlessly. But life, I was beginning to learn, had a way of quietly exposing its fractures. About 8 months ago, William told me he wanted to start therapy. I remember the evening clearly, the golden light of the apartment catching dust in the corners, the hum of our refrigerator like a metronome of normalcy. He sat across from me, calm, almost serene, and said, "I think I need to talk to someone. Professionally. Just for me." I nodded, eager to be supportive. "I think that's a good idea," I said. "I want you to feel better, whatever you need." I truly meant it. I had no inkling that the small, carefully chosen suggestion of therapy would become a weapon aimed directly at my heart. The first few weeks were subtle. William would come home from Dr. Albright's office with quiet insights, notes on emotional patterns, reminders about communication, suggestions to be more vulnerable. I listened, nodded, even asked questions. But slowly the tone shifted. Every Tuesday night, after his session, he would deliver what felt like a professional report, an analysis of me. "You're unemotional," he said one night, voice calm, measured. "You avoid conflict. You rely on logic to distance yourself. You think your quietness is peace, but it's control." I blinked, startled. I don't see it that way. I thought I was being careful, not controlling." William leaned back in the sofa, the dim light catching the edge of his profile. "It's not about perception, Anna. Dr. Albright sees it clearly, and I see it now too. Every conflict, every argument, every quiet tension, it traces back to you." I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. There was a serene certainty in his voice that made it impossible to find my footing. I kept thinking, this is just therapy. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe he's right. Every week, the list grew longer. By the third month, I was cataloging them in my mind. Cold, detached, controlling, distant, defensive. My love for him and my belief in fairness collided painfully with the creeping sense of betrayal. The apartment, once a sanctuary, began to feel like a courtroom, and I was the defendant standing silently at the center. One Tuesday night, the shift became undeniable. William came home, a slow smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He set his bag down with deliberate care, as though announcing a verdict rather than a simple return from work. "I had a breakthrough today," he said evenly. "Dr. Albright and I were talking about the root of my anxiety, and it all comes back to the dynamic in this apartment. He agrees with me. The core issue, the common denominator in all our conflicts, is you, Anna. Your emotional unavailability and defensive logic. He confirmed it. All our problems are your fault." The words hung in the air. I waited for him to soften, for tears, a plea, a request that I try harder, change, bend. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the absolute weight of his certainty. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. The constant exhaustion of trying to fix a system that was deliberately designed to blame me evaporated. It was replaced by a strange, electric clarity. I nodded slowly, deliberately. "Okay," I said. My voice was calm, more than it had been in months. "You're right. You and Dr. Albright have identified the problem, the single point of failure, me. Thank you." His smile faltered. "The solution?" he asked, confused. "The solution," I said, standing, "is for you to finally work on yourself. I am walking away. I'm removing the problem from the system." William's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I walked toward my home office, my heels soft against the hardwood floor. "I'm calling a moving company." His disbelief was tangible, a storm brewing behind his serene mask. You can't be serious." "I am," I said. "You declared me the problem. I'm solving it. You're free to focus on yourself. You should be happy." The next morning, the movers arrived at 9 sharp. I watched, methodical and calm, as the last pieces of my life, my clothes, my books, the terrarium we had built together, were carefully packed. William hovered, a mixture of rage, confusion, and disbelief twisting his features. "What are you doing with that?" he asked, voice tight. "The terrarium?" I asked, lifting the glass case with precision. I'm the problem, remember? I overwatered it. I'll take it with me. I'm fixing the ecosystem. As I walked out the door, the cool November air kissed my cheeks. I felt a pang of something. Sadness, perhaps, for the man who had tried so long to balance a broken system. But it wasn't regret, it was clarity. I had stopped playing by rules that were never fair. I had begun to play by my own. Even in that first act of self-preservation, I knew this was only the beginning. The quiet war had ended, but the fallout, William, his ex-girlfriend, the world that expected me to bend, was only just beginning. I paused at the corner of the street, suitcase in hand, terrarium balanced carefully. For the first time in months, I breathed freely, and for the first time I realized removing myself wasn't abandonment. It was survival. And survival was just the first step towards something else, freedom. After that first Tuesday of revelation, the apartment felt different, smaller somehow, as though the walls themselves were watching. Every object, every habit, even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to hum with accusation. I began noticing patterns I had once ignored. William's calmness wasn't neutrality, it was a weapon. His words were surgical, precise, designed to destabilize. It always started the same way. He'd return from therapy with that even, measured voice, like a surgeon presenting a diagnosis. "You're controlling, Anna," he said one evening, eyes fixed on me over a cup of lukewarm tea. "You think your logic is a shield, but it's a cage. You keep me at a distance. You create tension. You avoid real emotion. You've always done this." I felt my chest tighten. "I'm trying to understand," I said cautiously. "I want to see it your way. Can we talk?" He shook his head slowly. "Dr. Albright says you need to recognize it yourself. This isn't about discussion. This is about acknowledgement. Everything that goes wrong comes back to your emotional choices, or the lack thereof." I wanted to shout, to defend myself, but the words lodged in my throat. His calmness disarmed me. It wasn't rage, it was conviction, and it carried an almost hypnotic weight. Weeks passed. Every Tuesday, the same routine, a new list of findings, carefully packaged, supported by therapy jargon. Every trait, every perceived flaw was laid bare. I cataloged them mentally, first with disbelief, then with a creeping, gnawing anxiety. Was I really this deficient? I tried to intervene. "What if we see someone together?" I suggested. "Couples counseling could help. Dr. Albright could guide both of us." "No," he said. His voice was soft, almost tender, like a knife sheathed in velvet. "She says I need to process my feelings alone first. I have to find my own truth before we can work on anything together." It was absurd, but I understood the tactic. Therapy had become a weaponized mirror. In the reflection, I was the enemy. And in William's serene presentation, I was powerless. The turning point came one Tuesday in late October. The sky was a bruised gray, and rain streaked the windows as if the weather itself sensed the tension inside. William returned from Dr. Albright's office with a new clarity I had never seen before. His calmness had sharpened into something sharper, almost predatory. "I had a major breakthrough today," he said, setting his bag down with deliberate care. "Dr. Albright agrees with me. The common denominator, the source of every conflict, is you. Your emotional unavailability, your defensive logic, these are the roots of everything. Not just in the apartment, Anna, but in us." I stared at him, caught between disbelief and anger. You can't seriously believe that everything is my fault?" His eyes met mine, unwavering. "It is. And you see, acknowledging it is step one. Acceptance will save us both, but ignoring it, that's dangerous." A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just a casual accusation. It was a declaration. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of what had been happening for months. This was no longer about love, support, or even communication. This was control, disguised as insight, authority, even care. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in our bed, the sheets cool against my skin, thinking about every Tuesday, every calm accusation, every invisible trap I'd walked into. For years, I had prided myself on logic, reason, emotional balance. But the very skills that made me strong were being turned against me, reframed as evidence of my shortcomings. I thought of the terrarium we had built together, a microcosm of our relationship. I had nurtured it, cared for it, maintained balance. And yet, even there, his critique had found me guilty. Overwatering, underpruning, failing to notice subtle signs of imbalance. How cruel that something so delicate and alive could become a metaphor for my own perceived failure. But as the night deepened, clarity began to emerge. If William considered me the single point of failure, then by his own logic, the solution was simple: remove the problem. And for the first time in months, I felt a strange, invigorating calm. I began to strategize. I mapped out the apartment in my mind, the logistics, the timing, the precise steps I would take. Every Tuesday, every calm accusation, every list of flaws, it had all been a roadmap, and now it would be mine to use. The next morning, I made quiet preparations, contacting a moving company, researching temporary spaces, carefully organizing finances. Each decision was deliberate, methodical, almost ritualistic. This wasn't revenge, it was survival, and something more profound. Reclaiming my agency. Even as William continued his manipulations, dropping lists, lecturing softly, insisting on my acknowledgement, I began to see the pattern. The calm, clinical authority he wielded was only powerful as long as I believed in its absolute truth. But I had begun to separate his words from my reality. I could act now, without permission, without debate, without the weight of his diagnosis crushing me. And yet, the danger remained. William was sharp, charming, persuasive. The subtle shifts in tone, the measured pauses, the unspoken expectations, they could trap anyone who wasn't vigilant. I had to be precise. I had to be faster, calmer, smarter than him. It was still early days, but the battlefield was forming. And in that battlefield, I realized something crucial. Survival wasn't enough. I didn't just want to leave intact. I wanted to reclaim control of my life, my space, my mind. Every Tuesday that he presented a list of my alleged flaws, I would be gathering ammunition, not for confrontation, but for liberation. The storm was just beginning, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The first Tuesday after my revelation, William arrived home with his usual calm, deliberate demeanor, fully expecting me to cower under the weight of his diagnosis. He spoke slowly, listing every flaw, every failure he believed I carried like a scarlet letter. But this time, I didn't shrink. I didn't flinch. I was no longer the passive subject of his assessments. I was an engineer now, studying a system, identifying the weak points, and planning my extraction. I'm trying to see it your way, I said carefully, meeting his calm, almost smug gaze. I know you've identified me as the problem, and I've been thinking. Perhaps the most logical next step is for me to remove the problem. His brow furrowed slightly, a micro-expression I caught in the dim light. Remove the problem? Yes, I said. I walked with purpose to my office, past the carefully curated furniture, past the terrarium that had become a symbol of our carefully balanced yet poisoned ecosystem. The solution, based on your own conclusions, is for me to leave, permanently. William froze, a storm threatening behind the calm veneer. Anna, you're not serious. I am, I said evenly. I've already called a moving company for tomorrow morning. Boxes will be packed, and I'll be gone before noon. You declared me the single point of failure. I am solving the problem. This is the most efficient resolution, isn't it? For a moment, he said nothing. Then came the predictable flinch, a tightening of his jaw. This isn't how it's supposed to work, he said, voice quiet, controlled. That's the point, I said. You think everything is my fault. So logically, I must remove myself from the equation. I'm not arguing with your diagnosis, I'm implementing it. The next morning, the movers arrived at exactly 9. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and rain, the muted gray light of November filtering through the blinds. I moved with deliberate calm, packing my belongings with precision. Books, clothes, the terrarium. Everything was handled with care. William hovered like a hawk, pacing in circles, his calm facade cracking. You can't just take everything, he said, his voice rising slightly, betraying his shock. I lifted the terrarium, cradling it carefully. The terrarium, I said softly. I overwatered it. I probably mismanaged the ecosystem. I'm taking it with me. It's symbolic, isn't it? He stared, speechless, rage and confusion mingling in his features. The irony of it made me smirk, a private satisfaction I savored in silence. As the movers packed, his attempts escalated. First came the questions, soft but insistent. Then came the accusations, sharp and frantic. Finally, the theatrical pleas, tears, anger, and desperate statements about love, loss, and betrayal. I listened, detached, acknowledging nothing, intervening only with calm, logical clarifications. "You're throwing everything away," he said, voice breaking. "After all we've been through." "I'm not throwing it away," I said evenly. "I'm reclaiming it, and I'm reclaiming myself." When the last box was loaded, I handed him a cashier's check for $3,000, a gesture of controlled empathy, enough to cover transition costs, but not a single cent more. My lease was solely in my name. He had no claim. I had thought of every detail. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, incredulous. "Because you told me I was the problem," I said. "I am solving it. You're free now." As I left the apartment, the cool morning air brushing against my cheeks, I felt a pang, an echo of sadness for the man I loved, who had become an instrument of his own manipulations, but it was tempered by clarity. I had chosen myself. For the first time in months, I felt calm, unshakable. The terrarium, heavy in my arms, became my emblem of survival. A once poisoned ecosystem, now safely in my hands, ready to be nurtured and restored. Everything else, the furniture, the books, the memories, were tools in a careful dismantling of the life that had slowly become a trap. By the time I reached the temporary apartment I had booked, quiet settled around me like a soft blanket. I unpacked the terrarium first, pruning the yellowing ferns, cleaning the glass, restoring balance. Each careful gesture mirrored my own reclamation. The ecosystem, once failing, could now thrive, just like me. William's responses escalated over the next few days. Calls, texts, emails, they all carried the familiar mix of rage, incredulity, and manipulation. But I had rehearsed my calm. I responded only with logic and documentation, lease agreements, bank statements, transition funds. I didn't argue, I didn't plead. I simply executed the plan I had laid out. Every message from him, every desperate attempt to pull me back into the web only confirmed one truth. The power he thought he held was a lie. I had taken control, not through anger, not through confrontation, but through the quiet, deliberate application of logic, clarity, and preparation. And through it all, I realized something profound. The skill that had made me seem cold, distant, unemotional, the skill William had weaponized against me, was my greatest strength. Reason, logic, composure, attention to detail. They were the tools that freed me from manipulation. By the end of that week, the apartment was gone, the terrarium thriving on its new windowsill, and William was left with the consequences of his own accusations. And for the first time, I felt a deep, unshakable peace. The war wasn't over, not entirely. William's family, his ex-girlfriend, and even Dr. Albright had yet to intervene. But for the first time, I wasn't fighting blindly. I had the clarity, the calm, and the strategy to face whatever came next. I had begun to understand a truth that had eluded me for years. Liberation wasn't loud or dramatic. It was deliberate, methodical, and unstoppable. The days after leaving the apartment were quieter than I had imagined, almost unnervingly so. The hum of my temporary space was a reminder that I could hear myself think again. No lists, no accusations, no subtle condemnations. Just the soft rustle of pages when I picked up a book, the faint tap of the terrarium's water dripping into its moss. Yet the calm was deceptive. William wasn't silent, far from it. Texts, calls, even emails arrived in predictable waves. They weren't all direct. Some came through intermediaries, his ex-girlfriend, Gia, his sister, or even professional channels I hadn't anticipated. Every attempt carried the same mix: incredulity, blame, and an implicit expectation that I would act as though his diagnosis had moral weight. Gia called first, a voice sharp with judgment. "Anna, you've gone too far. You can't just take everything and leave him. He's devastated." I leaned back in my chair, coffee cup warm between my hands. "He declared me the problem," I said evenly. "I acted on it. I I removed the problem. That's all. No further interpretation needed. The line went silent for a moment, then came a harsh breath. That's cold. You're punishing him for trying to get help. Or perhaps, I said softly, he was punishing me for living. By the end of that week, the pattern was clear. Every appeal, every attempt to invoke guilt, every dramatic display was predictable. I documented them all. Texts, voicemails, emails. Each became a record of manipulation, a mirror reflecting the warped logic William had created. Even Dr. Albright eventually entered the picture in a carefully orchestrated phone call. William had, predictably, misrepresented our separation as a misunderstanding, hoping professional authority would pressure me into capitulation. Anna, your former partner is distressed, Dr. Albright said, voice cautious. He's hoping we can open a dialogue to clarify what happened. I cut him off politely, deliberately. Doctor, there is no misunderstanding. He presented a professional diagnosis claiming I was the source of all problems. I accepted the verdict. My removal was a logical, rational response. There is nothing further to clarify. There was silence on the line. I could almost hear the internal calculations, the shifting of professional boundaries. I see, he said finally. I understand. Thank you for your clarity. The satisfaction was subtle but profound, not because I had proven a point, but because the very logic they used to manipulate me now validated my actions. For the first time, I understood the power of calm, methodical response, how precision and composure could dismantle an entire framework of control. Even as William's ex-girlfriend tried to interject, offering emotional appeals and veiled threats, I didn't respond with anger or panic. Each message became a lesson. The chaos they attempted to sow could be absorbed, assessed, and neutralized. I was no longer reactive. I was strategic. And yet, there were moments of pangs, flashes of sadness. I thought of William, of the man I had loved, reduced by his own manipulations into someone I no longer recognized. I thought of the terrarium, the careful balance, the tiny, fragile ferns, the little decorative figures, and I understood that love, when poisoned, could survive only if nurtured carefully, outside of control and blame. The terrarium became my daily ritual, a tangible metaphor for the care and attention I owed to myself. I pruned, cleaned, balanced. Every new shoot that emerged, every fern that regained its green vibrance, was proof. Ecosystems can recover, even after neglect, even after manipulation. By the end of the month, I had moved fully into my new space, a small, orderly apartment filled only with what I chose to keep. The terrarium sat in the morning sun, thriving. My belongings were minimal, but each item was deliberate, necessary, and cared for. I no longer carried the weight of someone else's accusations or expectations. William's attempts to provoke me began to lose impact. Calls went unanswered. Emails were met with calm, factual replies. The manipulation that had once cut deep now bounced off the walls of my resolve. His world, the carefully curated battlefield of blame, was his alone. I had removed myself, and in that removal, I discovered something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: freedom. Yet I also realized the danger wasn't entirely over. William, his ex-girlfriend, even peripheral figures like Dr. Albright could attempt new tactics. But now, I wasn't the passive subject of his game. I was aware, vigilant, prepared. And the quiet thrill of anticipation, the satisfaction of measured control, fueled a new confidence. It was clear that the war of words, of accusations, of silent dominance, was a human battle, but it no longer had power over me. I had reclaimed my life, my space, my mind. The ecosystem of my world was restored, fragile yet resilient, and I understood that true empowerment came not from confrontation or anger, but from clarity, calm, and deliberate action. For the first time in years, I was unshakable. Weeks turned into months. The hum of my new apartment became my anchor, each morning a reminder that I had reclaimed not just a space, but myself. The terrarium thrived in the morning sun, a delicate green world I had nurtured back from neglect. Each day I tended it, I tended to my own recovery, removing decay, pruning away the toxic, and cultivating growth. William's attempts to manipulate me had dwindled. The calls, the messages, the desperate appeals, they arrived sporadically, almost ritualistically, like a fading echo of a storm long past. and I met them all with the same unwavering calm, my words precise, factual, and without emotion. No blame, no recrimination, no engagement with the drama. One evening, I received a message from Gia, sharp and insistent as ever. Anna, you can't just walk away. He needs closure. He needs. I smiled faintly, placing my fingers over the terrarium's cool glass. Closure, I typed calmly, is a concept for those still trapped in the narrative of blame. I've removed myself from the system. He is free to find his own resolution. So am I. Her reply came hours later, a string of incredulous punctuation and accusations. I ignored it, sipping tea, feeling a quiet satisfaction. I was no longer reactive. I was untouchable in my composure. Even when William attempted one final maneuver, contacting Dr. Albright to mediate a reconciliation, I handled it with measured logic. I documented the professional boundaries, my legal separation, and my financial arrangements. There was no room for manipulation, no crack in the system he had tried to weaponize against me. For the first time, I realized that the very tools he had used to control me, authority, rationalization, emotional leverage, could be turned into instruments of liberation. And in this quiet victory, I discovered something deeper. Empowerment wasn't about punishing him or asserting dominance. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about reclaiming my life, my peace, and my narrative. It was about choosing clarity over chaos, growth over stagnation, and my own well-being over someone else's need to control. I arranged the terrarium on the coffee table, its moss bright, ferns upright, little figurines restored to their places. The light from the window illuminated every detail. I traced my fingers over the glass and smiled. The ecosystem was healthy, balanced, thriving, and so was I. There were moments, of course, when doubt flickered, a shadow of what had been, a whisper of old guilt. But I silenced it with the truth. The fault had never been mine. The manipulations, the lists, the accusations, they were weapons he had forged. But I had dismantled them, methodically, deliberately, and without fury. In the end, it was not dramatic confrontation that brought peace. It was calm precision, self-respect, and unwavering clarity. William's world remained chaotic, entangled with his ex-girlfriend, with his own misperceptions and resentments. My world, by contrast, was simple, beautiful, and fully mine. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, unburdened, free. I had survived the storm, navigated the maze of manipulation, and emerged intact, not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and fully empowered.